Hello guys, welcome back to another video. Today I will be doing my second look at the 2026 midterm elections, focusing primarily on the Senate, but I will do a short look at the House elections towards the end of the video. So the first thing that we want to do when we're looking at these Senate elections is rule out the races that we know how they'll go even today. Because of the state of polarization in the US, many of these states are basically decided already. They're so one-sided politically. So I'm just going to go ahead and start by filling out all of the Republican guaranteed victories. So as you'll see, these are mostly rural states across the Midwest and South, with the exception of two southern states, Georgia and North Carolina, and Kentucky, which we will talk about in just a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same for the Democratic seats. So we have Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, Illinois, Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, New Jersey, and Delaware. So next I want to go through and look at some of these swing states. So I'm going to go ahead and label them Michigan, Georgia, Maine, North Carolina. And so these are the states that I really think will be up for grabs in this election. I can see them going either way. It really depends on the popularity of the Trump administration and Republicans and Democrats as a whole. The party that is more popular will have an advantage in these states. And most of these states are, swing states in presidential elections. It basically follows that trend. So in the most recent election, Trump won 3 of these 4 states. He won Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia. He won Michigan and Georgia by around 1 to 2 points, while he won North Carolina by a little bit more than that. And then Maine is the only state where where Kamala Harris won that is on this swing state list. And that is because it has had its current senator, Suzanne Collins, who is a Republican for a very long time. And it is really up in the air whether she will be able to keep that seat or not. She has consistently been able to do well. And so next I want to talk about some of these other states currently have not listed. So this is Ohio, Kentucky, and Texas and Alaska. So these states that are normally very one-sided politically, Texas is a Republican stronghold. It has been for a very long time, as well as Kentucky and Alaska. Last time Alaska voted for a Democrat, I think, was Lyndon Johnson in 1964. So it is very, very one-sided. But there are some factors that could make them more competitive. So, for instance, Ohio was a swing state in the past. It has consistently trended right over the last few elections. Obama won it both times, and then Democrats lost it ever since, and has moved further and further towards the right. But in the most recent election, Sherrod Brown, who was the Democratic senator from Ohio, lost by pretty big margins, but he could potentially make a comeback. And I think that really depending on whoever he was running against, he might get closer than his last election, I would say. I don't think he will win. I think that Ohio has trended far to the right for a Democrat to win there, unless the Republicans have really screwed something up. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this one as this shade of red to say that it will most likely be won by Republicans. And next I'm going to go to Kentucky. So in 2026, Mitch McConnell will retire from his seat in Kentucky, and so it will be an open race. And currently Kentucky's governor is a Democrat. His name is Andy Beshear, and he is actually one of the most popular governors in the country, which is not something you usually see from a governor in a completely opposite politically state. So Kentucky has been very Republican for the last probably 40 years. And there are some political pundits out there that are saying that Andy Beshear might run for senator of Kentucky. I really just didn't mark Kentucky because I wanted to talk about the history of popular governors of a different party running for the Senate. It's happened many times. Most recently, Larry Hogan, who was the Republican governor of Maryland, ran for senator of Maryland, and he lost to the current senator, I think it's Angela also Brooks, by a pretty large margin. And even though Larry Hogan was very popular. And this is really because of the difference in what people think is important when it comes to governor versus senator. For governor, people base most of their opinion whether they like the person, whether they think they'll be a good governor, whether they'll help them out. Whereas in the Senate, they vote based more on party, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. There's 100 senators, and so your senator is just going to disappear into the crowd, basically. And so you care more about what their positions are versus who they are. And so because of that, I do not think that Andy Beshear has a chance at winning in Kentucky. I do not think that he will even run. I think that he is going to wait until 2028 to run for president, which I think he has a much better chance at getting. So I'm going to mark Kentucky as the dark red, show that I do not think the Democrats have a chance there. So then we get to Texas. Texas, as I said, is a classic Republican stronghold. It is one of their biggest source of electoral votes, and Democrats have been hoping to flip the state for a very long time. The closest they got was Clinton when he ran. I think it was the second time when he got closest, and they haven't gotten near that since. In 2020, Biden got within 5 points of Trump in the state, but then those numbers collapsed into 2024 when it went back to around 14 points. And so Democrats mostly have this hope for Texas because of the changing demographics of the state. Texas has had one of the biggest population growths in the country, and it is a lot of Hispanic immigrants who are living around this southern area along the Rio Grande near the border with Mexico, as well as educated professionals moving into Texan cities. And most of these immigrants are coming from liberal states like California and New York. So Democrats hope that these people will vote for them and that they will continue gaining ground until eventually they can win in Texas. And this idea was kind of reinforced in 2018. We can see that Ted Cruz won Texas by only about 2.5 points against Beto O'Rourke. So this was the best that Democrats have done in Texas for a while. And it made them very hopeful that they could win the state in the future. They hoped that in 2020 they could maybe potentially win it, if not just lose by 1 or 2 points. Now, we did not see that happen. Trump won Texas by about 6 points. And then in 2024, as we said, it went to 14. And this was mostly because of changing voting patterns. We know that Hispanic voters saw one of the biggest rightward shifts of any group in the 2024 election, which is one reason why Texas went so far to the right, and we can see that in the specific counties. See in 2020 that these areas along the Rio Grande are mostly blue, and see by pretty big numbers. Brooks County by 19, Jim Hogg by 18, Hidalgo by 17. And then if we go just 4 years later, see that basically all gone. Brooks County is only 10, Jim Hogg 8, and Hidalgo, Trump won by 3. See that is one of the clearest reasons why Texas moved so far to the right. But another one is that many of those people moving from liberal states might not be voting liberal. Many of them may be fleeing those liberal states to move to Texas, where taxes are lower and they can get more of a lifestyle they agree with politically. And so I don't have Texas marked as Republican because of the current chaos in the Republican Party in Texas over who their nominee will be. Right now, there are two pretty different candidates running for the position of Republican senator from Texas. One of them is the current senator, Cornyn, and he won by a large margin in 2020. You can see he won by almost 10 points. And the other challenger is a much more far-right Republican and the current Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton. And so I expect that there will be a lot of fighting during the Republican primary over who the nominee will be. Cornyn has faced some backlash against the MAGA wing of the party because he is seen as a little bit too moderate. So you might see the MAGA wing support Paxton while more moderate Republicans support Cornyn. And I think that if whoever wins the primary is the only Republican running in the race, Republicans will definitely win Texas. But I think that if both people choose to run, let's say Cornyn wins the primary, if Ken Paxton decides to still stay in the race as an independent, I think that Republicans would lose. They don't have the margins in Texas to be able to do that. And so I'm going to put Texas as still lean right, because of course this isn't guaranteed to happen. It actually might not be likely to happen, but it still could. And if we saw that, we could see a very interesting political situation in Texas. So the last one I want to focus on is Alaska, or at least for these states there are reasons why I haven't classified them. So Alaska has been a traditional Republican stronghold. It's had Republican senators for a very long time, and they've won by pretty big numbers. So you can see the last one in 2020 won by 13, 2022 by 8. And so in 2026, unless one specific person runs for Senate as a Democrat, I think that Republicans will win it. I think that if the former representative of Alaska's whole state district, Mary Peltola, runs for Senate, I don't think that Democrats have a chance in the state. Peltola showed that she could win statewide when she won in 2020, or in 2022 rather. So Peltola won against Sarah Palin by almost 10 points. And this is a very large victory. So we can see only 2 years before, the Republican won by almost 10 points. So it's a 20-point swing in just 2 years. And then if we go to 2024, we can see that the Republican only won by 2 points. That shows that Peltola has a real popularity with the voters of Alaska that most Democrats do not have. She brings something to the table that the voters of Alaska really like. And so I think that if she runs for Senate, she could have a real chance of winning. And that may not happen. I think recently she said that she was going to run for governor of Alaska, which I think she would also have a real chance of winning. But Senate is maybe off the table for her. And because of that reason, I will put Alaska as this red color. And next, I want to talk about Maine. So Maine has voted Democrat pretty consistently over the last few elections, but it still has a Republican senator. And I think the reason for that is because Suzanne Collins is not a diehard Republican. Maine tends independent. One of their senators, Angus King, who caucuses with Democrats, is registered as an independent. And Suzanne Collins, who is registered as a Republican, doesn't always vote with other Republicans. And so I think that this is very important to the voters of Maine. Suzanne Collins' last election in 2020 saw her won by around 8%. And this is a little bit misleading. Maine has a unique way of voting. They have ranked choice voting for their Senate. And so Suzanne Collins' win at 51% is not really how it would end up in any other state. So how ranked choice voting is you basically have all the candidates listed out and you remove the least popular until one candidate gets more than 50%. So these other less popular candidates are removed and removed until Suzanne Collins got 51% of the vote. But not all of the other candidates were removed. So you have a couple of independents that still have their votes counted in this race. If these candidates had been removed as well, I think that this race would have been a lot closer. I think that it would have been probably about 2 to 3 and maybe even 4% by a Suzanne Collins victory, and not a 9% like you see here. And so I see a lot of people talk about this 51 to 43% vote in 2020 and say how it's basically guaranteed that Republicans will win, but I don't think they know the intricacies of Maine's voting laws. And so I think that in a year like 2026, which I expect to be slightly more democratically leaning, voters usually go against the current administration. Will they win it? I'm not sure. I think that Maine truly is a toss-up, if not a slightly leaning Republican state, just because Susan Collins is the incumbent and she's pretty popular in the state. But I think it's mostly up to her. I think depending on her support of President Trump's administration, she could see either gaining or loss of support with Maine. If she supports Trump's policies that are not popular with Maine voters, I think she will lose. And if she manages to thread the line between what Maine voters want and what the National Republican Party wants, I think that she will win. So I'm going to keep Maine as a toss-up. So the next state I'm going to look at is Michigan. And so Michigan does have a current Democratic Senator, Gary Peters, but he is retiring and not running in 2026. And I think that this might really hurt the Democratic Party in Michigan. As you can see, in 2020, Peters won by around 1.7%. And this was, if we go to president, we can see that Biden actually outperformed Peters by around 1%. And so if we see a more popular candidate, Democratic candidate for Senate in Michigan, I think that they will still win the state or win the Senate race in the state. Because as I said, I think that this race will be Democratic leaning. I don't know by how many points, but I expect it to really influence the outcomes of elections in these swing states. And so because of the Democratic lean to this election, I'm going to put Michigan as a slightly blue-leaning state. But I think there's really still the possibility that Michigan will be up in the air. Currently, we do not know who the nominees for either parties will be for the Michigan Senate race, so it's hard to really look at the support of each one and how they will do with specific groups in Michigan. So I'm just going to base it off of the politics that it currently has. And next, I'm going to go to Georgia. So Georgia is an interesting state politically. If we look at the presidential map, we can see that in 2012, Mitt Romney won Georgia by 8 points. In 2016, Trump won it by 5. In 2020, Biden won it by 0.24. And then in 2024, Trump won it by 2. So this really shows some interesting trends in Georgia. And I think one of the most interesting ones is the difference between 2020 and 2024. So Biden barely won the state in 2020, and Trump won it by around 2 points in 2024. But this is a much smaller shift towards the right than many other states in the country. We can see that Biden won Michigan by about 3, and Trump won it by about 1.5. So this is almost a 4-point swing in Michigan. And in Pennsylvania, Biden won by 1 in 2020, and then Trump won it by around 2 in 2024. So it's about 3 points. And so in many other states shifted very far to the right. And overall, the national popular vote shifted by around 7% towards the right, while Georgia only shifted by 2. And I think that this bodes well for the Democratic Party's chances in the 2026 Senate race. So if we can look at the last Senate race, which was in 2022 when Raphael Warnock was elected to his first full term, we can see he won it by about 3. And this is a little bit misleading. So this was a Republican-leaning year. I can see that Republicans did quite well. They won the Wisconsin Senate. and did well in North Carolina and some other states, and almost won in Nevada, but they lost by 3 points in Georgia. And this is mostly because the candidate they won. Herschel Walker was an extremely problematic candidate, and if Republicans had run, generic Republican person won, they probably would have won the state. It was just Herschel Walker's problems that held them back. We see in 2020, both Ossoff and Warnock were elected by 1.2 points for Ossoff and 2 for Warnock. And this generally fits with how Biden did in the election. So you see a great shift towards the left in Georgia from the last Senate election when Johnny Isakson won by 14 points, going to both Democrats winning by about 2. And this is also because of the candidates they ran against. David Perdue basically ran by not running. One of the most famous pictures of that campaign was John Ossoff debating against an empty podium, and him not showing up for that probably really negatively affected his campaign. But it's good to see for Democrats that when Warnock won by 2 in a year where Democrats did very well, and then won by 3 in a year where Democrats did very poorly, that their politics, or that Democrats are becoming more popular in the state. And a lot of this is because of demographic change. A lot of people are moving into Atlanta, and most of these people are typical liberal voters. They are highly educated minorities from liberal states. Most of them are coming from cities like Chicago and New York City and some cities from California, and they are greatly affecting the politics of Georgia. And we can see that if we go to the county map mode from 2024. If we look at the difference between 2020 and 2024, we can see that even though Trump did better in the state overall, some of these counties in the surrounding area of Metro Atlanta, so we look at Fayette, Newton, and Cobb County, shifted to the left. So it wasn't by much, but it was still just enough. And this is because a lot of people from Atlanta and from other states are moving into these surrounding suburbs. And so this is really what's driving Democratic victories in the state. And so I think that just based off of demographic changes in the current Democratic incumbent, I think that Democrats have the slightest advantage in the Georgia Senate race. I'm going to put it as the lightest blue possible. That one works. And so the last state I'm going to talk about is North Carolina. So North Carolina is another state like Texas that Democrats have been trying to win for a very long time. Recently, in recent elections, Obama was the last Democrat to win it. He barely won it in 2008. If we go look at that election real quick, we can see he won it by 0.3 points. And so then in his second election, 2012, he lost it by 2. Excuse me. And so elections have been consistently close in North Carolina, usually from like 2 to 3 to even 4 points. But the Senate elections might give the Democrats an advantage in the state. So even though they haven't been able to win the presidential election in North Carolina, they may be able to win the Senate election. This is because the current Republican senator from North Carolina, who is up for re-election in 2026, Tom Tillis, is not very popular. Both sides of the aisle don't really like him. The MAGA Republicans in North Carolina have a problem with him. They think he is too centrist, and the Democrats think he is too far right. And so he's not really popular. And I think that if he manages to get past the primary and becomes the Republican nominee, I think that he will have a lot of trouble. I think that it's possible that he will lose, and even if he does win, I think that it will be very close, probably within a point. Excuse me. And I think because this election is mostly up to who the Democrats decide to run, I'm going to leave it as a toss-up. I just think that there's not really any way to know this far out, And I think that when we get closer to the election, within like a year or a few months, when we know the nominees and get some more polling around that time, it will be easier to see. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was the 2026 House races. So let me just go to the map. So right now, Republicans have a seat advantage of 220 to 212 seats. So Democrats gained seats in 2024. They were not able to get enough to win House control, but they did keep it competitive enough where Republicans really have to get their act together and get everybody on board with what they're doing in order to win. And so because of what I said earlier, how the party out of power tends to do very well during midterms because of the rejection of the party in power, I think that Democrats will most likely win back the House. And I do not know by how many seats. It's really hard to get that information. That mainly depends on the popular vote. And if we go and look at 2018, which was a very big year for Democrats, it was a somewhat of a blue wave year where they went from being the clear minority in the House to the clear majority. And so if 2026 is similar to 2018, I think Democrats will be able to win big. So if we look in 2016, Republicans had a huge advantage, 241 seats to 194. And then in 2018, Democrats won 235 to Republicans 200. That Republicans lost 41 seats in this election. If Democrats did that well, they would have a very large advantage. Even right now, they are only slightly down from Republicans. If they win 41 seats, they would have 253, and they would be able to have clear control over the House. And I think that really, whether this happens or not, is due to the popularity of the Trump administration. If the Trump administration is popular by the midterms, I think that Republicans as a whole will do well. I do not think they will be able to keep their majority, but I think this is more about keeping it close. I think that Republicans should really just hope to keep above 200 or 210 seats in the House. I think this would give them a real shot at potentially re-winning it in 2028, or at least keeping a lot of power in the House. And I think that this also depends a lot on how the map is drawn. Currently, there are still a lot of states that are potentially going to be redrawn, or are definitely going to be redrawn. Like we see the map of Ohio here is going to be redrawn. It is completely for sure. And then there are potentially some other states that will do it to give one party more of an advantage. So recently in 2025, there was a vote for a Supreme Court Justice of Wisconsin. And Democrats hoped that their nomination for the Supreme Court, who did end up winning, would help push through an amendment, a court case that would force Wisconsin to redraw its congressional map. Because as you can probably see, their congressional map is very heavily gerrymandered. Democrats are clearly in the minority. A lot of the big cities are basically split, or all the voters there are forced into one, while Republicans are given a massive advantage with all their districts. And so this ended up not happening. They decided to push it back. I think it will still happen just after the 2026 elections. So that is a bad thing for Democrats. They will not have this advantage of redrawing Wisconsin's map that would basically guarantee them seats. And I think that Ohio will also be redrawn in a way that will hurt Democrats. There are a number of districts in Ohio that are extremely close. Let's see, let me go to the House, go to Ohio. This district right here, Ohio's 9th, was won by only 0.6 points. I think that Ohio could redraw this district to give it a Republican advantage, effectively losing Democrats a seat in the House. And there's also currently some talk about a number of other states redrawing their maps, like Texas and California, to give their majority party more of an advantage. And so control of the House is really up in the air right now. I think that Democrats do have an advantage, but there is a lot that can happen over the next year and a half. And so with that, thank you guys for watching in and watching the whole video. I hope you'll check out some of the other videos on my channel. I've done a couple of other videos focused on the midterms. I did a more in-depth look at Georgia and some information about their demographic change and why I think Democrats are going to do better there in the future. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.